Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to Tarot Memoirs. We are into the courts, and this week we're going to be talking about the swords. The Court of the Swords. As I mentioned in last week's episode on the Wands Court, I found the courts to be the most challenging part of learning the tarot. What I learned while prepping for this series is that there are so many different systems of looking at the tarot court, and a lot of those systems, as I mentioned, don't agree with one another. So for me, the piece that I really got out of prepping for this series, this part of this series, is that when you find a way of looking at the courts that really works for you, stick with that. Because the more layers, in my personal experience, the more layers you add, the more convoluted it becomes until you really aren't sure if you're coming or going. I find a simplified, modern approach to looking at the courts really works for me. Today we're going to be looking at the courts through two different lenses. Sort of. I'm going to be using two primary books. So if you're new to Tarot Memoirs, what I typically do is I use reference books. I read some snippets that I've highlighted in those books. We look at various versions of the cards from decks from my collection that I think depict those cards in an interesting or helpful way. And then I share something about my personal experience that sort of ties it all together. And that is the point of Tarot Memoirs. Now, in the Minor Arcana and the Majors, I shared very specific memories about those energies. When it came to the courts, though, I felt like I needed to look at them in a more general way, because while I may have a Page of Pentacles in my life, or a Knight of Wands, or a King of Cups, I feel like the court cards represent a general type of personality, and it's not always so easy pigeonholed to a specific person. That being said, the books we're going to be looking at are Your Tarot Court by Ethany Dawn, and Understanding the Tarot Court with Mary K. Greer and Tom Little. Now, both of these books have some wonderful gems to share, but I've been using Mary K. Greer's book to look at the overall energy of the element of the suit and the ranks. So something specific, so just the general thoughts about what a page means and what a knight means, and then the energy of that elemental suit. So that's what we're using this book for. And then I'm using Ethany Dawn's book for specifics about the court cards, because this is the approach to the court that I feel is the most closely aligned with how I see the court. And so this is the system that I feel like works the best for me personally. So this is the one we're going to look at for specifics, this one for general. Let's dig into it. So the first thing is to look at the energy of the suit of swords, because that is the suit we're looking at today. So in general, the suit of swords is the element of air. So if I didn't mention it last week, wands are fire, swords are air. So when we're looking at the suit in general, swords represent intellect, rationality. This is according to Mary K. Greer's book, so this is what I'm reading from. Logic, analysis, and the actions that logically carry out these attributes. Swords dissect the original idea. They think about it, they talk about it, they struggle with it, they organize it, and they cut through anything not focused on the issue. Then they judge solely on reason and logic. Swords also thrive on the exchange and development of ideas, and hence communication. So general keywords for the sword suit: conflict, criticism, strategy, thinking, analyzing, planning, law and order, wit and cunning, communication, struggle, decisions, reason, discriminating, understanding, problem solving, discussion, mental processes, and the fight or flight mechanism, which I will add there's also fawn and freeze, but that's a whole other conversation. So that is what Mary K. Greer's book had to say about the swords as a general energy of the suit. Now we're going to be starting with the page. So I'm going to share a little bit about the energy of pages in general. Now this is the same information I shared last week, so you're welcome to skip past this bit until I'm showing the cards, but this is what I wanted to share with you about that. So pages tend to be open, learning, curious, innocent, and ready to grow. Again, this is from this book. They love life, receive life, and are immersed in the essence of their suit, living it out without complication. They're sort of a naive, beginner, open-hearted kind of approach to all the pages, in my opinion. They generally signify curiosity, opening, novelty, hope, trust, growth, innocence, beginnings, and study or apprenticeship. Pages also traditionally could be message bringers or messengers, which I think is an important aspect of the suit as well, and something that I think I play with a lot more when I'm either working with Benabel Wen's Spirit Keepers Tarot or with the Marseille. But I just thought I'd mention it because I didn't mention it last week, and so there's another little tidbit for you. So we're going to be starting off with the Page of Swords. I'm going to take a look at what Ethany Dawn has to say here about the Page of Swords specifically. I said specifically. That's what I just did there. So the swords, whoa, I thought I was in the right spot, but apparently I was not. So you guys get to come along with me while I actually look for the correct page. Isn't that fun times? Prepared. Lisa needs to be more prepared. They're not in the order I was expecting, so there was that. Okay, so the Page of Swords. So the Page of Swords, hold up the Rider-Waite-Smith version. So this is from the Centennial edition of the Rider-Waite-Smith. So here's what he looks like up close. He's standing in the wind, he's sort of holding his sword. They are the element of air, as I mentioned, and the zodiac can be any 3 air signs. So Gemini, any of the 3 air signs. So Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius. And Ethany's archetype for the Page of Swords is the detective, and I love that archetype because to me it perfectly describes the Page of Swords. His keywords: inquisitive, messages of the intellectual kind, inspiration, let me hold him up closer for a minute, simple solutions, the question why, oh my gosh, yes, understanding, contemplation, discovery. Life is something to be solved to the detective. They love to know what makes people tick, what made something happen, and how they can put the puzzle together to make sense. If they're unable to figure something or someone out, it is going to drive them to distraction. Super true. Super true. So let's take a look at some of my Page of Swords cards. So I've picked decks based on the decks in my collection, or some of, there's so many to choose from, that I think do such a beautiful job of showing the energy of the court cards. So we have the Sasarai Bito Tarot Page of Swords. And she's holding her sword, she's looking straight ahead, and if you look, there's almost these like little eyes on her cloak. The pages tend to be incredibly observant. These are like the kids that constantly overhear everything, and then they're gonna ask you 8,000 questions about what they heard. You cannot get something past a page. You can't be subtle around a page because they're gonna be like, why'd you do that? What's that for? What's that mean? So I think this energy really captures that. In the Tarot of the She, we have the Dreamer Princess, Gift of Telling. And I think this is really beautiful. It doesn't quite capture the detective energy, but it certainly captures the sort of communication energy of the page, which is very much about Page of Swords. When it comes to communication, they're going to be the ones that are going to blurt things out and not necessarily realize they should have maybe reined it in. In fact, they're the ones that might end up saying something awkward because they don't realize it's awkward because they just say what's on their mind. And they don't always fully think through the consequences of their words. That said, that can be a problem throughout all of the sword suit in various aspects, but because the page is still learning how to communicate and learning how to master the energy of their suit, they're more likely to fumble in that way. The Page of Swords in the Robin Wood Tarot I think is so lovely, and this does capture the detective energy. You do get the air and the movement in this card, but you also very specifically get a little spyglass hanging from the belt of the Page of Swords. And so you understand that they want to look, they're inquisitive, they're curious, and I love that. Interestingly, in the Textured Tarot, our page also has a spyglass and is standing on a pile of books. So you definitely get, again, that lookfulness or that watchfulness, that attentiveness that we get in the Page of Swords. In the Page of Blades in the Everyday Enchantment Tarot, you have this boy who is studying and learning about bugs, and so he's really paying attention to the world around him, and he is being curious about everything he finds. That curiosity, I think, is so charming about Page of Swords characters. The Page of Swords in the Light Seers Tarot is reading, and you can just see all these light bulbs as they're having like idea after idea after idea, all because of what the information that they're encountering. And this can be difficult with the Page of Swords too, because that energy sometimes has a hard time focusing in on one idea or one thought, because there's all these different ideas and thoughts springing up all at once. And then finally we have the Page of Swords from the Anna Kay Tarot. And this has more of that, in my opinion, that apprentice energy. He's obviously trying to learn a craft, and he's not ready to be fighting with to be practicing or sparring with other knights or other warriors, so he's practicing on a test dummy here. And to me, that's a perfect apprenticeship kind of energy. So I think between all of these cards, we kind of get to see some various shades of the Page of Swords. my thoughts, as far as the Page of Swords is concerned, oh, did I lose my, there we go. I was like, I lost my place over here. I've got my piles of cards. So in my opinion, the Page of Swords in my life shows up as people who are endlessly curious rather, about everything. Pages are, they want to take things apart to see how they work. These are the people who want to like literally open up that like electronic device to see what's in there. Like there's this endless curiosity to uncover how something works, why it works. And they can actually sort of approach people in the same way. Something as simple as an emotion can actually get them really almost unsettled because they want to know why. Why are you having that emotion? Like what's causing that? What can we tweak here? What can we like fix? And so this can be something that all the Swords suit does, but the Page in particular is incredibly curious about just how everything and everyone works. They tend to ask a million questions, and they don't do that to be annoying. They just legitimately want to understand everything. They can, while they can have a hard time sort of narrowing down their interests, in my experience, they also sometimes can hyper-focus to the point where they get very tunnel visioned, and they can be hard to sort of distract or get their attention if you need their attention. So if you imagine like people walking around with their nose in a book, or just going down a rabbit hole of an internet search for like hours and hours and hours. But the Page of Swords inspires me with their curiosity. So let's talk about the Knight of Swords. This character, man, gets into some trouble. I'm just saying. Knights in general can get into trouble. I think that's the thing. They're so movement oriented and so driven that they can cause problems for themselves and other people. But let's take a look at the Knight of Swords in Mary Greer's book, or rather, excuse me, the Knight in general. So the Knight in general lacks the king's sense of perspective, but makes up for it in sheer energy. Can be brutally direct, seeks to revolutionize and create change, is the daring adventurer, the risk taker, the romancer, and the idealist. Now this can change a little bit depending on what suit we're talking about. Essence is motion. So the Knight of Swords essence is movement, is motion, and that's any knight of any suit. Grasps his suit's lesson, however extreme they may be, by putting forth his all. So a lot of times the energy of the suit, if you put that into like fast movement, that's basically the knight of any suit. So when we look at that from the perspective of the swords, we're looking at thinking and intellectualizing and curiosity, and then you put that in a fast-moving energy or communication, and you can see where the pitfalls might be of that energy as it moves very quickly, but also the dynamism and the potential when that energy moves very quickly. Keywords of knights: energy, intention, idealism, passion, focus, vitality, movement towards a goal, single-mindedness, and a lust for life. True of all the knights. So let's take a look now at Ethany Dawn's book and see what she has to say about the Knight of Swords. So specifically, here's our tarot card from the Rider-Waite-Smith. The element, of course, is air, and the zodiac sign is Gemini. And the archetype is the warrior. And his mantra is, I know what I do. Now, I forgot to mention the mantra for the Page of Swords, which was, I ask. Makes perfect sense, right? But the Knight of Swords is, I know what I do. Like, I know what I'm doing. Like, I'm gonna go do it now. Like, he gets an idea in his head and he's gonna do it. He's gonna act on it. Keywords are self-discovery through intellect, acting on impulse, all bark, no bite, talking first, thinking later, yes, innovation, cutting or hurtful words, charging ahead, rash decisions, and immaturity. The archetype of the warrior. So the warrior is a finely tuned machine, not only physically but mentally as well. They know that it is only half the battle to have a body that is ready for anything. The mind has to be just as well trained. I think it's important to think about the fact that warriors tend to, that quick moving energy is coming from a place of thinking. And sometimes they can overthink, sometimes they can get caught up in their head about an idea, they can make assumptions. There's ways that quick thinking can be really positive, and there's ways that quick thinking can be really shadowy and tricky. So think about that as we look at some images here of our Knight of Swords in my various decks. So here we have the Knight of Swords in the Sasarai Bito Tarot. And we really get this idea of cutting through and getting clarity, but also the delicateness of the butterfly was split here. So you almost get this idea of that quick thinking or that assumptiveness can also have consequence. We have the gift of liberty with the Dreamer Prince in the Tarot of She. And that's one thing about the Knight of Swords. He's a very free spirit. He doesn't like to be tied down, at least not mentally, and will really stagnate if there's not places for him to expand in a mental way or an intellectual way. The Knight of Swords in the Robin Hood Tarot is all air energy and all movement with this Pegasus and this like electrified sword. You definitely get the idea of charging ahead without necessarily being concerned about the details, so that's something to consider. And we have a very similar energy with the Knight of Swords in the Textured Tarot. I love this depiction of the Knight of Blades in the Everyday Enchantment Tarot. We have this hairdresser who's obviously gotten it in his head what he thinks is going to work for his client, and he is just going to town, and she looks very worried. And he's like, it's fine, it's just hair, it'll grow back. And he's got this energy of like, I know what's best and I'm just going to do it, without thinking about how it's going to make his client feel, if it's really going to be what she wanted. It kind of looks like he just sort of took off with inspiration and he's off to the races without thinking about consequence. So I think that's really, really on point. And here we have our Knight of Swords in the Light Seers Tarot, and he's running for his bike. There's a crow flying ahead. He's got a crossbow, it looks like, on his back, and it's like he's just gotten an idea and he's gonna go for it right now. Maybe it's that raven he's after, right? Maybe he's hunting and he's like, oh man, if I hurry, if I hop on my bike and I just go after this raven, I can get it while I'm riding or something. But there's a carelessness to that energy as well. And then we have the Knight of Swords here from the Anna K Tarot, and this one's a little darker. You get the idea that he's rushed off and done some damage during his fight, and maybe that was necessary, but maybe that extreme of a response wasn't required. Food for thought. For me, Knight of Swords people in my life have shown up, oops, there we go. Knight of Swords people have shown up in my life as people who are very impulsive. They get an idea or thought in their head and they just go. They tend not to take the time to really consider any ideas or reactions to those ideas, and they instead just tend to fly by the seat of their pants. They're very spontaneous, but in a way where once they have the thought, they just have to act on it. They have to do something about it right away. They're just as curious as the page, but their curiosity is rooted in action. So they get curious and they go do something. They get curious, they dive into something. They want to do something about their thoughts, interests, or ideas. They can be a bit bull in the china shop and a little bit self-absorbed. When you get an idea and you just run with it without thinking about consequence, such as we saw in the Everyday Enchantment version of the Knight of Swords, there is the capacity to do some serious damage, right? But that being said, how Knight of Swords people inspire me is with their complete lack of hesitation. They are not procrastinators, and when they want to get something done, they get it done. Maybe it's not always the right thing, but they're definitely always moving forward. So let's take a look now at the Queen of Swords. So we're going to look at the Queen's energy generally in Mary K. Greer's book here. So Queen energy, intra and interpersonal oh, I was going to show you the Centennial Rider-Waite-Smith. Oh, and I usually wait till I'm showing Anthony's, but that's okay. We're going with it. Intra and interpersonal mastery and expertise in her field. Remember, the courts can be genderless. So while this book does use gender in the descriptions, remember that they don't have to be female or male or binary at all. She leads by persuasion, intuition, and by nurturing and encouraging others. She is a facet of the Empress, expressing understanding and creativity through the energy of her suit. So she is like a little Empress, but an Empress within the realm of air, which I think is really important to remember. Her keywords are understanding, teaching, creativity, persuasion, nurturance, intuition, communication, emotional awareness, leadership through consensus. And that's any queen, not just specifically the Queen of Swords. But let's look specifically at the Queen of Swords in Anthony's book. So element again, of course, is air, and the zodiac sign for the Queen is Libra. If I didn't mention it with the Knight, he was Gemini. I think I did though. And the mantra is, I nurture through the mind. I love that. I nurture through the mind. And her archetype is the Judge. And I think that's perfect for the Queen of Swords. So her keywords are emotional intelligence, problem solver, fair, soothing words, nurturing through kind words, always knows what to say, icy words, shock, and manipulating words. You can tell this tarot archetype just about anything, and they will be there to support and aid you if possible. If there's a solution, they will help you find it. Conversely, this is not a person you want to try to con. They are not about to be sweet-talked into anything and will call you out if you're acting like a clown. The Judge is a no-nonsense kind of person when it comes to the truth, but that does not mean that they are uncaring. And I think that's a very balanced way to look at the Queen of Swords, in that balanced energy. But I can also see where the shadows can come into play, and I'm sure that you can too. If we're looking at somebody who is coming at a situation from the process of like sort of intellectually nurturing, or nurturing through words, or nurturing through intelligence or reason or logic, there can be some pitfalls to that particular way of reasoning, nurturing. So let's take a look at some cards. So we have the Queen of Swords in the Sassari Bito Tarot. And we really see her, I think, communicating past this sword. And I get this idea of her words have to travel past this blade to reach their destination. And I get the idea that her words are being sharpened on their way out. Now, sharpening your words can be making them more clear, but it can also be making them unnecessarily blunt. We have the gift of reason with the Dreamer Queen in the Tarot of the She. And I think reason is a really wonderful keyword for the Queen of Swords. She's definitely reasonable in that way when she's in her balanced energy. When she's in her light side, she's very reasonable. She can help reason through situations. She can untangle complicated interpersonal messes because she's able to look at things from a more neutral place. The Queen of Swords from the Robin Wood Tarot, I just love her. I think she's so beautiful. She has butterflies in the inner part of her cloak. She again is the sword, how it's positioned. I still get this idea of her words have to travel past the blade to be sharpened before they get delivered. The Queen of Swords in the Texture Tarot. Very calm, collected, clear thinking kind of energy comes through in this image. I love the Queen of Blades in the Everyday Enchantment Tarot because she's like a doctor or scientist, and you can tell she knows her stuff. She's got her degrees there hanging on the wall. She knows her anatomy, and she's making decisions from a knowledgeable place. So it really looks at sort of her as an expert in her field, which I think is a really cool depiction as well. This is probably one of my favorite depictions of the Queen of Swords in any deck, and it is the Lightseer's Tarot Queen of Swords. And what really captures my attention about this is you can see she's got great perspective. She's looking out at the situation. She seems more balanced because she's got her sword down. She's only ideally using it when she needs to versus cutting or running all of her words past it. She's hopefully deciding when and where that's necessary. The only thing here too is that you get a little hint of shadow as well because you see her heart is sort of locked up in this little cage down here where it can't be as easily accessed. And I think that's an important aspect of the Queen of Swords energy, is that often there is a bit of, there's just a bit of a, it's harder to get to the emotions of the Queen of Swords. It's harder to get to that soft spot, right? And then we have the Queen of Swords in the Anna Kay Tarot, and the Queen of Swords is often depicted in this sort of icier way because she often has that cooler, more crisp way of communicating and of relating to other people. So I think that's really accurate. For me personally, no, don't lose my notes. For me personally, I think Queen of Swords people in my life tend to be very analytical and very particular. They try to approach other people and other situations from a very cerebral place, and sometimes that works really well, and sometimes not as much. They can sometimes miss emotional cues, particularly emotional subtleties and those sort of softer, squishy bits that just kind of escape their attention, or they don't seem to hone in on them the way that others might. They can be quick to form opinions or judgments, but they typically in their healthy state, they'll make them from a place of consideration and confidence. So yes, they're coming to judgments, but they're being very clear-headed and very neutral as much as possible about getting to a place where they can make those judgments. Queen of Swords personalities inspire me with their clear-headedness. They do tend to be very clear about their feelings, their thoughts, their opinions, and they know how they want to express themselves. So let's take a look finally at the King. So the King in a general way, again, from Mary K. Greer and Tom Little's book. The King makes decisions and he delegates tasks. He shows outer public mastery and expertise in his field. And as I mentioned last week in the Wand suit, whereas the Queen's expertise in her field tends to be applied internally and interpersonally, the King's expertise he manifests out to the public. So he's a very public-facing type of energy, a very leader type of energy typically. In many ways, the Emperor, he is the Emperor of his suit, right? He's the Emperor with a focus and aptitude limited to swords. And again, if you think of him as a little emperor, it really helps to hone in on what he stands for and what his personality might be like. Kings generally signify prowess, authority, competence, respect, mastery and leadership, and decision making. And let's take a look now at Ethne's King of Swords in your tarot court. So the King of Swords, again, air, and the astrological sign would be Aquarius. One of the things I think that's interesting about the Rider-Waite-Smith image of the King of Swords is how he's like almost larger than life. He seems giant compared to the trees around him, and I think that can very much be true of the King of Swords. His archetype in Ethne's book is the scientist, and elsewhere in the book she also calls him the specialist. So you get a couple different ways of looking at him. I like the scientist. I think it works for his intellectual domain. His mantra is, I lead with logic. And his keywords are intellectual maturity, brilliant mind, highly educated, keen-minded, tunnel vision, massive amounts of influence, logical ruler, and all in the mind. The scientist is a person on a mission. They feel it in their bones that they can change the world for the better if only they're given the chance. They're naturally drawn to books, reading, education, and learning as much as they possibly can from an early age. The scientist can be an intimidating person, but they rarely lord their accomplishments over other people or want to make others feel insignificant. True, they're confident, but they don't tend to be jerks about it, usually, and especially when they're in their light side, right? So in the cards, in the Sastre Ibito Tarot, here's our King of Swords. Love him. We have the gift of judgment in the Dreamer King of the Tarot of the Sidhe. Very much in that rulership place. The King of Swords, and you'll notice the body language of all of the kings is very confident. They're often depicted very much in their power. I don't think I very often see King of Swords that don't look demanding, right? Oh, that last one was the Texture Tarot. Here we are, or sorry, this one's the Texture Tarot. That one was the, this is the Robin Wood Tarot. This one's the Texture Tarot. Clear thinking. Butterflies do represent that idea of thought, ideas, movement. The King of Blades is literally a judge in the Everyday Witch Tarot. So we get this idea of, again, a leadership position, somebody who makes judgments and is able to do that from a place of reason and logic as a living. Our King of Swords in the Light Seers Tarot looks like a dreamier kind of intellectual. So he's an intellectual leader. He's very confident. He's in his element, but he's less in that sort of looking for external recognition. He doesn't need it. He's already got it from within, and I think that's really cool. This is my favorite depiction of the King of Swords at the chessboard because to me, the King of Swords is very much a strategist. So let's talk about that for a second. So I put that I see King of Swords people as the ultimate strategists. That's literally what I wrote. They have the big picture thinking that all the tarot kings have, but the King of Swords uses that perspective intellectually to plan how to make sure things go the way that they want. They know how to line up situations, people, everything in their life to reach a desired outcome. They can very much think several steps ahead, and they inspire me with their ability to navigate really complicated situations, and especially very complicated like interpersonal situations, because that clarity that they have just sort of cuts right through, and they look at sort of practicality from a what is the smart thing to do? Not necessarily what feels good to do, but what is the smart thing to do? And so they're analysts and they're strategists in that way. I would be super curious, thank you so much, by the way, for hanging out with me. I would be super curious to hear if you had any aha moments through this video. Did anything get clearer for you about the family of the swords in the tarot court? Did you have any moments where you're like, yes, that makes perfect sense? Or any thoughts on any of the images I showed of any of the different representations of the tarot court in the swords? I would love to hear that. Please leave it down in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. This is nearing the end of a very lengthy series I've had on my channel where I have looked at all of the tarot cards in the tarot. We went through the majors individually, the numerical cards in groupings of 1s, 2s, 3s, etc. And now we're in the courts and we're just about ready to wrap up. There is a link to the full playlist at the end of this video if I haven't linked it up in the cards or something. But thank you so much for joining us. Remember that if you would like to book a reading, you can always do that over at supportivetarot.com. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!